saw Kindred in the music video and got hyped. I know they just developed shared development in Jhin with some way and interesting tidbits about them. I mean, Kindred is a super hype character, and that video, if y'all haven't seen the video that came out, it's good. Oh wow, it's good. Beautiful. Another incredible music video. So the way Kindred was related to Jhin is Kindred was originally a jungle bounty hunter cowboy. Sound familiar? It's a little familiar because that is the concept we ended up, part of that concept we ended up adopting for Jhin. Like, basically, Kindred was originally like this, like, you know, creepy cowboy bounty hunter kind of character, and then was pivoted to being Kindred, where the bounties aren't like gold bounties, they're death, right? The actual manifestation of death. And so, but we still had this cool, weird cowboy guy who like takes bounties and shoots people. And so we then revisited that with Jhin. One of the reasons we revisited that, by the way, and this is a fun fact. This is a fun fact about game design. So how to start this story. Sometimes I will say things like, we decided not to do a complicated character there. Like sometimes I'll be like, we had this idea where Viego could have 3 different swords, and then we decided, you know what? That's a lot of resources to give Viego 3 different swords. And so we probably aren't going to do it because it's not worth it. And invariably when I say something like that and it gets posted, there'll be people commenting being like, wow, Riot is so freaking lazy. But the reality of that is you only have a certain number of art resources for any given character, and you only have a certain amount of time for any given character. And at the end of the day, you usually can't do, say, 5 complex characters a year. Instead, if you wanted to do 5 characters a year, in terms of resources and whatnot, you probably would want to do like 1 or 2 complex characters, and then the other 3 being a bit more simple, so that you can like dedicate the art resources that the complex ones needs to really make them sing, and then, you know, the simple ones aren't going to be as resource intensive. An important note here is something simple is not bad. Something simple is not guaranteed to be lame or not cool. Like, as an example, Set is incredibly simple, and he's incredibly cool, right? Like, just because a character has 3 different models does not make them necessarily a cooler character. That's just a different character, right? So the thing I'm getting at is if you're making Kayn, you might also want to be making Set, because Kayn's going to be very complex, and he's going to rock, and he's going to be awesome. And then making Set at the same time then frees you up to make sure like both of the characters get the resources they need, basically. And this is under the assumption that you're working in a world where you do not have infinite resources, you do not have infinite people, and you do not have infinite time, which is just a reality for game dev. In game dev, you do not have infinite people, resources, or time. And in fact, you can't, in many cases, you can't just hire more, because too many cooks in the kitchen is not necessarily going to be like good results here. It's like, at the end of the day, like, there is diminishing returns for some amount of people, right? And so because you don't have infinite people, resources, or time, you have to make decisions. So we're starting with that. Not every character is going to be super complex compared to others, and sometimes we set goals to make simple characters to make sure that like we can make the right amount of things. And again, it's not through laziness, it's about like the desire to make lots of cool things. The reason this story is relevant is that's where Jhin started. Jhin started as, we are going to make an 80 carry, and we only have 5 months to do it. So is there anything we could make that's going to be fast and straightforward and in a lot of ways just kind of work? And so when we jumped into Jhin, we knew we were making an 80 carry, and we knew that the old Kindred concept for like a cowboy bounty hunter was really cool. And so it was a fairly straightforward thing to say, to be like, if we're making this 80 carry on a tight timeline, we should grab something that we've already started, that we already think is highly interesting and cool and fun, and we can take that forward. And so Jhin was then, you know, we jumped on the like, well, we've already been thinking about this cowboy, sniper, bounty hunter kind of thing. Let's see if there's something there. And that concept eventually evolved into what you see of Jhin today. Yeah, and also, fun fact, Jhin was originally scheduled for a 5 months release cadence. We ended up extending his timeline by 2 months. So it ended up being 5 months was way too fast. And so near the end of the project, we extended the timeline, partially because of things like there was a lot of other projects going on that, you know, needed time as well. Like as an example, we were working on the Keystone Masteries at that time. That was one of the projects I was on with Squad 5 as well as Jhin. Keystone Masteries, for those of you who don't know, is the system right before runes. So Keystone Masteries was like kind of like a first test of like what a cool rune could be. And then also things like I got sick for like a month. So it ended up being that the 5 month timeline on Jhin was a bit too fast, and so we ended up doing him in 7 months instead. But overall, in the grand scheme of things, Jhin, for a more recent League champion, recent in this case being like within the last 10 years or so, he was on a faster timeline than a lot of them. The average champion tends to take about a year to make, if I would say like an average. But some characters, you know, are meaningfully less, and some characters are meaningfully more. So yeah, that's my story about Jhin and his connection to Kindred and how he kind of got to Kindred from Jhin was. And this is something that often happens a lot in design, at least at Riot, is sometimes you'll have a really good idea, right? You'll be like, this is a cool idea for a character, or a cool idea for a spell, or a cool piece of concept art. And you'll pitch it, and it just won't work for whatever reason. It might not fit what you're trying to do, it might be too complicated, it might just be bad, who knows, right? And you'll pitch it. But a lot of times when ideas are really, really compelling, they'll stick around, and they'll float around, and they'll like, every once in a while, like come back. And sometimes an idea that happened years ago might show up, and it's like, oh, actually, this is the perfect time to do it, and it's going to be sweet, and it's going to be really cool, and then you do it, right? So just because an idea doesn't get made when you pitch the idea doesn't necessarily mean it won't be made in the future, depending on like, you know, what it is and how compelling it is, things like that. Can we talk about ASOL rework? Personally, I felt it became a very low skill cap champion and lost most of his identity as a placement god. So the thing I'll tell you about the ASOL rework and many other reworks, the Poppy rework, the Scion rework, the Aatrox rework, there's a whole subset of reworks where the goal is not to maintain the old champion identity, because the old champion identity, for whatever reason, is heavily flawed, such that it is very unhealthy for the game, or it can't maintain an audience, sometimes both, doesn't fit the fantasy well, things like that. And so when we made the ASOL rework, the goal of the rework was not maintaining his identity as a placement god. And so it's not a negative outcome that it didn't maintain it, because that wasn't the goal. The goal of the ASOL rework was to give him a new identity, because we felt like his old identity was, in the grand scheme of League of Legends, fairly unfun to play for most players. It was, you know, fairly flawed for most players and not something most players were interested in doing. Old ASOL was the least popular champion in the game, and it wasn't close when we reworked him. You know, there had been other champions before who were less popular than him, like old Yorick, old Urgot, things like that. But it's just an honest answer of some reworks. It is not always a goal or an important value to maintain the identity of the old character if we believe that identity has pretty meaningful problems. Sometimes it is. Sometimes it's like, you know, when we reworked Vlad, he still needed to be the healing dude, right? And I'd say the Vlad rework overall, like, very heavily maintained that identity, but like, that's okay. Like, that's one of the things we wanted to keep in that case. But many reworks we do, especially to some like the champions that don't tend to be able to hold like a minimum of a player base, we tend to be like, well, we probably need to change the identity because this identity doesn't seem to be capturing what people, what League players generally might enjoy.